Hello, I'm Stephen Matchett from Campus Morning Mail, and this is Expert Opinion, where we ask people who know what's going on in education and research, what's going on. Expert Opinion is brought to you by Twig Marketing, Australia's original higher ed marketing consultancy. Got a brand issue or a message that isn't getting out? Talk to Tim Winkler. Tim at Twig Marketing, that's one word, lowercase, .com. And thanks to producer Amanda Johnson from Twig, who makes Expert Opinion happen. Ask anybody in the research establishment and they will tell you about the importance of discovery research. The problem is that isn't where the growth money is going right now. There's a bipartisan commitment to applied research that can get ideas to job-generating markets and get them there, hopefully fast. The Albanese government is stuck with its predecessor's economic accelerator model, and one way or another, there will be applied research in Minister Husick's National Reconstruction Fund. Mr. Husick is also a fan of the CRC program. But is the emphasis on research that can get to market soon overdoing it? And is the economic accelerator's fast fail stage-gated model the best way to go? I'm joined by a bloke who knows a bunch about applied research, Tony Peacock. Tony Peacock was the long-serving head of the Cooperative Research Centre Association before it decided to become an entrepreneur. He's now chair of Wintermute Biomedical, 10 Carbon Chemistry, and the Australasian Pork Research Institute. Good morning, sir. Thanks for sparing the time. I know how busy you are.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks, Steve.
Can I start by asking, how's the transition from research admin expert to entrepreneur? How's that going?
You got to raise money. I've spent 30 years of my career spending money, other people's money, through the levies in the R&D system, and then yeah, sure, you've got to go and get those grants for a CRC and then membership funds in the association, but selling products and making sure you have enough time to do the R&D in order to get the products to sell is it's really different, and it's fun, but I don't think I've ever been as busy, and I might have told my wife I was semi-retiring, so let's hope she doesn't watch this.
What do the two companies do?
So Wintermute has got a bit of intellectual property on a strange discovery, fatty acids, making them soluble in water. Now, fatty acids have been known since the 1890s to be antimicrobial, and they don't really succumb to antimicrobial resistance as quick as the more sophisticated drugs do. And so they were the subject of a lot of research prior to penicillin, and then they'd largely forgotten after that. And there's a bit of interest in them now. And we've got this nice bit of IP whereby we can put them into water, which makes it much, much more amenable to turning them into drugs, particularly for surfaces and things. And we've spun off 10 Carbon Chemistry from our main one because the stuff we're really working on there is industrial cleaners. I didn't know, Stephen, that glass, when it's in the recycling stage, absolutely stinks. When you pile it all up, it's full of sugars and water and yeast and things. So it grows, it's like a giant agar plate, and it stinks so bad people won't buy it. And so we're actually spraying our stuff on at the start of that process and taking the stink out, and therefore you're making a product that was largely going to landfill into essentially just sand. So, but you did not get me started on that. We're going to talk on higher education. So I deal with the universities on a different level now.
But tell me about that, because that just strikes me. Is anybody who a strong believer in discovery research will just say that you've just justified their model? You started with one thing and then all of a sudden.
And look, I'm not a very good researcher, and especially at the discovery stage, and that's why I went into research management early. I like the start of the research, and I love talking about it. I'm not particularly good at doing it, or don't find that part fun that other people get a massive kick out of. But I'm all in favour of very large investment for our country and for the world in discovery research, and leaving some people, talented people, to just do what they do best. I think it's a problem when we actually ask people that are really good at discovery research to suddenly become, you have to be involved in applying it or whatever. If some of them find that really, really hard, and I think there's room for both. There are people that love applied research. There are some that at different ages, in their career. I had a Federation Fellow, 1,000 publications, who participated in a CRC for the last few years of his life, of his career. He's still alive and very well, actually. Because he said, I'd like to see more of my stuff turned into something practical. But for 30, 35 years of his career, he was absolutely brilliant at getting to, finding discoveries, and that absolutely improved that area of research in the application. And
has that been lost in the present debate?
Yeah, in terms of what we're asking our academics in Australia to do and what we're asking all the universities to do, I think is often we're asking them to do everything. And I'm a great admirer of the German system. We talk about an innovation system. We don't really have an innovation system. We've got a bunch of things, and we tend to ask our universities to do everything. Whereas I think there are, certainly within a university, you can have different types of careers and applying and discovering stuff. But I think you're better with a bit more separation, with lots of points of contact between those groups. I think that's how you get the best out of your system.
But what about the NHMRC and then the MRFF? Does that not cover that model?
It does to a degree. I think one of the problems, everyone acknowledges it with things like NH and MRC, because the scarcity of money, we make it harder and harder to get. So that we're down to sometimes even single-digit success rates in getting grants. So you're not getting the flow through of people. We shouldn't forget Australia. We only spend 1.6, 1.8% of GDP on R&D, and it should be 3 or more. So what we don't want to get is people trying to, trying to turn the new national reconstruction fund into a national research fund. We have everyone grabbing at every new bit of money and saying it should serve these 3 or 4 purposes when it's been set up for 1 or 2 purposes. And you do that because of the scarcity of money in the system.
We're not alone in that. I mean, you can spend the entire Commonwealth budget on medical research and people would still complain.
Yeah, and you've told me not to libel anyone, so I won't force you to edit the thing. But it's hard if you're saving babies or you're curing cancer, then you're very, very passionate about it, and you think every bit of money that goes elsewhere is a dollar wasted sometimes. So I don't blame people for being passionate about their area.
So, but it's not a problem Australia is unique in facing. What do the Germans do?
Well, the Germans, right down in a Max Planck Institute or the Fraunhofer system, everyone knows what their job is, right down to the technicians, and they're not seeking money. Now, Germany doesn't have nearly as strong a research capability in its universities. Its universities are relatively weak compared with ours. So not everything about Germany is brilliant, but the universities serve one purpose, which is principally teaching and some research. And then they have the Max Planck Institutes for discovery type research, and then the Fraunhofers for much more applied research. But a Fraunhofer, for example, has to get basically 1/3 of its money in contracts, 1/3 from industry and 1/3 from the government. And they don't want to go above that. They don't want to go to 60% industry, because that means they're too applied in their view. They're not at that, translation and early pre-competitive stage. That should be for the companies themselves. But you need a strong industrial base for doing that. Companies that are able to put in at that sort of level. you need a strong alumni, so they have a far bigger throughput than, say, CSIRO of their staff. So CSIRO, I think, has staff turnover of a couple of percent a year. Fraunhofer's is something like 15% a year. So 70 or 80% of their projects from industry come from Fraunhofer alumni with it that are sitting out in industry, because they know what they can do. They know about it, all the kit, what they've got, the type of people, and it's pretty seamless.
Do we have a big enough base to do that?
I think that's, one of the problems of such a small country, small population, managing a land mass considerably more than Germany, and an economic zone that's the third largest in the world. So, yeah, we're asking people to do a lot here, and we need to be efficient about it. But I don't think the answer is to ask people to do even more all the time. I think there are some people that should just be in discovery type research, and yes, they need links to make sure any practical things that can come out of their research does. And there are other people where I've been asked to give lots of seminars in universities, which is basically trying to get every postdoc to put in NH and MRC applications that realistically don't have any chance of getting up. They need to be part of bigger teams and that sort of thing. So I really don't like performance type agreements, and I don't think there are many left that say, you have to put in X number of applications a year or whatever to be seen as research active.
What about is it the pioneer universities, the 5 with the 5 new funded models with specific objectives?
I think there's a case for Australian universities to become more specialised. I don't see a heck of a lot of it happening because, it's so much cheaper to teach large cohorts of lawyers, or they don't. And look, every time they try to become more specialised, the vice chancellor and the university council are absolutely pilloried by the staff. Nobody ever wants to see their bit moved out or shifted. So things like pioneer type university arrangements where you incentivize it and try and build up areas, I think is probably the way you go, rather than relying on the universities to shut it down. So, I think we've become so reliant on the international dollar and the undergraduate dollars through the Commonwealth system that it's a really hard job running a university to find the money you need to run the place.
You look at the special universities that have had specialist visions. I think it's USQ, Southern Queensland, which is this big space program.
Yep. And you don't have to be big to be good. So it's one of the things we all often comment, that take the list of the very top universities in the world. And they tend to be quite small universities. Harvard's not a big university. Oxford's not a big university. They tend to be quite small universities compared with the Australian model, which has had too many incentives on it, I think, to get really big. And I think, incentives to get more specialised would actually help research in this country and where people want to climb up ladders. But then, the Australian community's not been willing to put more money into universities than they have. They see it as, it's a big industry. They should fend for themselves. You'll get a lot of pushback if you try to increase university budgets.
But let me come back to that in a minute. But on that very point, it seems to me that there has been something of a sea change in the national mood that this government has tapped right into, that the pandemic made Australians more amenable for an intervention, for a large interventionist state, be it making sure that nobody went broke during the pandemic because they feared for their jobs, but also in the government's attitude towards almost Chifley-esque, creating a Chifley-esque base for the country.
Well, it's only in Campus Morning Mail this morning. I read that our former chief scientist and current science policy secretary for the Academy of Science was advocating for a bit more pointed priorities, I guess you'd call them, like the Americans call them solicitations, where they actually are much more specific, just very large priorities of, advanced manufacturing or manufacturing, sorry about that. They can, for years, anyone with even a very mild degree of imagination can absolutely fit into the national research priorities. I remember when they did the refresh a few years ago, and one of the, one of the proposals was to stick cure disease on the health one. Whereas Professor Chubb has pointing to, in the States, they've got a really long history of being more specific about their priorities and actually making them sort of calls or challenges, and that sort of thing can work. I think along with it, you've got to commit to some longer term funding. If you really expect, say, a university to say, yeah, we'll take the risk and go after this in a big way, I think, you really need to guarantee them with 10 or 15 years of funding, not the CRCs are incredibly privileged to be up to 10. But I think that's the only one. Everything else is a maximum of 5. And I mean, as soon as you're established in doing something significant in 5 years, you're thinking about how do we get funding in year 6.
With a few celebrated exceptions, CRCs are shut down. They are time limited.
Oh yes, look, I think that's a very good part of the CRC. When my father learnt about what I was doing in Cooperative Research Centre, and I said, in those days you have a major review at 2 and 5 years, and if they're not working, they're shut down. And he was a good private industry guy, and he said, that should apply to every single government program. And you do get things that just keep going because they've got funding forever, and so they're looking for the next thing. And where we could strengthen the CRCs again is that the government requirement on hard international reviews has backed off. That's been handed over to the directors of the CRCs. If I was minister for a day, I'd say, well, I want to read the summary of your reviews, and I want proper external hard reviews. And I think if you're privileged enough to be pulling, $50 million of government money, that's an entirely reasonable thing for the community to expect.
I imagine it would upset people if you gave them to the Australian National Audit Office.
No, I wouldn't ask them to do it because they concentrate on it. But it's hard to organise a review in something like a CRC or a Centre of Excellence, because you've often got the best people in the area working. So, and they don't like to be questioned, and everyone's so busy, they're getting on with their thing. So when it was government imposed and it had to happen in year 2 and year 5, and then it was a midterm, I think that's a good thing. And I'm all in favour of, if a CRC is not working, or any other Centre of Excellence is not working, or one of the centres, they're very privileged in having that money. So they should be, on the other side of the coin, they should be absolutely accountable for it as well.
Just turning to the economic accelerator, just in that in the applied research model, is the stage-gated, 4 stage-gated processes that the government's created? Was that the best way to do it?
I might have put a submission in saying, be careful. I hate when I like government programs that are designed with as fewer rails as possible, and then you get good people to run them and make those people run them well and then review them constantly. If you try to set up the perfect model, people do this, and I'll go to the CRCs again, this is wrong with this CRC or whatever, and you often find out it was a bid that didn't get up, and some business person has complained to the minister on the plane. This was terrible, and reflected on the whole program. The fact is, there's very good CRCs and there's less than good ones, and you can't get the perfect model for them. You need people that are really expert at running them, and you need to let them actually take responsibility for them. I think some of these programs, we're starting to get to too many checkbox in the, that they've got to satisfy this and that and this and that. And by the time somebody, the board of directors is actually running it, they've been asked by government to just administer an algorithm almost of, I've got to have 40% of my money in there, and I've got to have 10% here, and I've got to check this box there. I really like the Clean Energy Finance Corporation model, and I'm happy for it to be used as a model, because as far as I can see, it was given a pretty good mandate, not that many stipulations on how to do things, and then it went out and they appointed very good people to do it. Now, at one stage that made them very unpopular with one side of government, because they were getting on with the mandate, and you can get people disagreeing with how they're doing it, whatever. But I think that's a very good model for these sort of things, and preferable to, everyone has a say, and then the pie gets divided by so many slices that none of the slices can really make a difference. Sorry for mixing all my metaphors there, Steve.
Something I'm never been guilty of. When quantum computing, as far as not that I understand a word of it, but as far as I can get it, it really just started with people mucking around in a lab. In the Australian context, at least, there was no national direction. It really was very, very pure research at inconceivably complicated pure physics, and one way or the other, that has now evolved through the system into something. Whilst now it is still immensely theoretical, it looks like it maybe possibly could have enormous applications.
Yeah, and that's where having that straight out discovery type funding, where you're backing really good people, you're not making them fill in 500-page forms, and we do actually get 500-page forms. It's hard because the expert type system where everyone gets a say on who gets the money does tend to divide the money too many ways. I think discovery research is expensive because of the nature of it very often. Some of it's, of course, cheap, where people have just been asked to think and that sort of stuff. But I'm all in favour of really simple systems to let those people get on with it. Again, lots of review, that sort of thing, so you don't become a boys' club as those systems can be. And you actually do need systems to bring new blood into the area, but I think asking new blood to always compete in the same arena is a bit harsh. You have some early career systems to bring the new blood in, but anything we can do that lets those people get on with it. I mean, somebody like Michelle Simmons, for goodness sake, what a national asset. Just let her go for it, and then can we supply more money, please? I think that's if you can find systems, but again, that there's a huge limiting step there, which is the cash. And we do keep having to point out to the Australian community that if you want to be like a really sophisticated, high-level industrial country, we do need to spend more on research overall.
In terms of dividing the pie, is the research block grant model a part of the solution, or is it a problem?
Look, and I was a huge advocate of, and was the number one thing I advocated for in the CRC program, was to link more of the block grant to the practical outcomes, because CRCs were disadvantaged under that old system, and that's important that we don't disadvantage them. The practical research we really do need to divide it evenly. But I think if you were designing the system from the start, you'd probably not have the block grant. I'd actually pay the full cost of research rather than trying to subsidise it through a different system 2 years later. I think and then you actually get competition on delivery of the research. That if price is an issue, if you're a company like us and we ask 3 universities that are all quite capable of doing work for us, as long as we're satisfied they're competent, we're going to go with the one that's charging us $20,000 as opposed to $30,000. And you do see a lot of waste. You see a lot of replication in the system. And I think, it's the biggest thing in Australian research is the block grant. And I actually think at the end of the day, it is a complicating factor, and that we'd be better off to say to the AAC and the NHMRC and the other government programs, you should put in for the infrastructure of whoever's doing the research for you. And then it does, everyone's competing on an even field then, because CSIRO always have to say, yeah, we're more expensive because we don't get block grant. Whereas if the university's actually got it in the cost of the research they're winning anyway, they would be compensated for that infrastructure. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
No,
I think it's
a number of political issues with that. But wearing your entrepreneur's hat, do you rate the argument that universities are all bureaucratic and they don't talk to business and it's all the academy's fault?
No, yeah, some days I do. But then I come around and I calm down. I've currently got contracts with, I think, 3 Australian universities and 2 American. We fund research in universities. You would expect that. Well, we don't fund in it. We pay them to do a job. It's contract research, but there is a fair degree of we want their ideas as well as their test tubes and things like that. So we're going to good people, and it does still take a heck of a lot of arguing on IP, things like that. I would say it's 100% better than it used to be. The universities clearly want to work with industry now. That wasn't always evident in the past. But we are, we don't have the systems for really simple contracting and things like that. So I recently done a job where the University of Minnesota has access to a bit of technology in African swine fever, one of the biggest threats to biosecurity in Australia. We wanted to do some work in it. I was able to do a contract in just a day, really, with them. Their research office has very standard forms. They're making no claim on your IP. And so they have channels that you can go down and there's no worries. Whereas similarly, the timing was the same with an Australian university I won't name, and it took 8 weeks. The contract came back once, still claiming all the IP. Well, if you claim all our IP, you're actually claiming our company there. But I agree with the sentiment that a lot of academics and university administrators will express, which is that we're trying to get marginalised costs and get them to subsidise us all the time. Australian industry has to face up that these things cost money, and you have to pay. By all means, argue on the price, but you can't keep screwing them down constantly to deliver it at a price that is costing the university. That's not fair, and it's not sustainable.
You've been in this game for an awfully long time, remarkable for one so young. But how have things How have things changed? Have they changed for the better in the way industry looks to look to researchers in general?
Look, the biggest differences I've seen would be that change in the block grant did get universities reaching out to industry more. I think they were doing it anyway. And so, I very rarely disagree with the Deputy Vice-Chancellor's intent or and then the researchers, lots of researchers want to work with industry. There's no question of that. And that they're very good at it, but sometimes you get, stuff a bit strangled in the middle. And then I'd actually point to the CRC projects. I think they really, when you get researchers that are involved in them, they really get into things in a big way. And I see the researchers and the industry really working together. And those grants don't go to the university; they go to the company, and the company has to collaborate with at least one other company and one, not always a university, a research institute. So it might be CSIRO or can be the National Measurement Institute, just has to be a research institute. And that's made a huge difference. We often, in the big CRCs, which, CRC now is, if you put it together, it's a minimum of a $100 million enterprise. Takes a year to bid, maybe 2 years to bid. And they're fantastic when they get going. But a CRCP, the paperwork is very limited. It's really only about a 30-page application. You can do most of it it's really only about a 3-page serious guts of it. And it's a reasonable amount of money, up to $1 million a year for up to 3 years. And the companies that have got into that are really making a difference. You see Defentex, some of the space companies really getting into that, and it really suits them. And I think that's a really good design there. I'd love to see the program. It's the first round, I think 30% of them got up, but it's down to very small percents now. And if you want industry to be involved, you do actually need a reasonably high success rate, or they just won't put in the thing. But I would say the minister's doing a really good thing, which is saying this is going to be the opening date, the closing date, and when we announce them, that's a gift to everyone. It doesn't cost government a cent to actually just have really regular rounds. So, because I used to always get asked, will there be another round? Not instead of when it's the next round. And there should be a website where you go to, and for the next 2 or 3 years, everyone knows when the round's going to come. Don't time the announcements for a minister's visit to somewhere, just announce them. I mean, no government's ever won government on the basis of, the industry minister's announcement of a couple of grants at a university. But industry and the academy really do need some certainty in the system about when these things are going to come.
You've been nice about to Minister Husick. So let me ask you, close asking you a question. If Dan Husick, if Ed Husick asked you what was the one governance change he could make within existing budget parameters, what would you say?
I'd actually say, convince your colleagues to do what you just did. And I know he's a very persuasive guy, because all the medical people and all the discovery people and everything, I think we had, what was it last year? We had Christmas Eve, I think they may have finally announced. We have incredible uncertainty. 21, I think. Yeah, incredible uncertainty in the system, where people don't know if they're going to have a job in a couple of months' time. Well, you can't get an academic job in a couple of months. And if they leave and they go into the public service or off to a company, they're not coming back usually. Very often that's it. And, so things like the early career systems and stuff like that, I think the ARC and NHMRC admins were all pretty well, if they're told to do the work by this time, are willing and able to do to a time frame. the hold-ups are nearly always in minister's office. This is about approving them or going through them. And you've got to do it at some time. I think they should put some deadlines on themselves to get some of this. Pretty simple thing, Steve. It's not going to. But also, I think we should be really keeping the discussion going that a country like Australia can't really cope at less than 2% GDP into research and development if we expect to have a competitive, if we're going to be world competitive in our industries, we need to be world competitive in our research system.
It's a great way to close. Tony Peacock, thank you so much for the time. I know you're busy. I hope we do it again. Stephen Matchett from Campus Morning Mail, and we're out.